Let's get your images to go from this to this. I'm Rob Kruger, taking Talk Pics. Alright, there's no reason to hesitate here. I'm going to jump right into it. I have the raw file here. We're going to open that up into Photoshop, Camera Raw, of course. And in here, we have all these different fields we can do, but what I like to do first is go to my presets. Now, a preset is a group of settings that have been pre-selected and then saved to be used in the future. So a lot of photographers have their own. There's a lot of different preset packs out there that you can purchase, all sorts of stuff out there. There's quite a few that I have created or have acquired or purchased or whatever that I really like. One good thing I like about presets is when you highlight over them, you are given a look at what it's going to come up as. Alright, so you highlight over the preset, it'll show you what you have there. And for our purposes today, this is actually the one I'm going to select. So there's a bunch of different presets available, but you know, go with what you want or what you like for your images. So you have your preset made there, and you can see here we went from the exposure being at 0, contrast is now up to 25. Sorry, the exposure was at 0, now it's at 0.3. Contrast is now at 25 rather than 0, because all these fields were laid out as, you know, being 0. But this is just a good starting place. Now, just looking at the image, I'm not a big fan of these crazy highlights. I did have a flash behind them to enhance some of the shadows, even though it was during the day. But I think the highlights pushed it a little bit too far, so let's just pull them down. See where we can get a little bit of recovery there on some of those highlights. Ooh, yeah, it kind of gets a really funky look. But what we have for ourselves is a very nice way of looking at kind of the detail in the highlight areas. These wood chips, the grass, these leaves even start to come back in to play here. Now we have a lot of darker shadows kind of running through the tree here. Obviously the gentleman's suit here, the back of these leaves. And I'm okay with dark shadows. That doesn't bother me at all because it gives it a little bit of a contrast, but because we pulled those highlights down, we actually have a little bit of a problem where there's not enough you know, difference now because the highlights have flattened out. So rather than boosting up contrast and things, I just want to start to see more first. Okay, so I'm going to bring up those shadows just a little bit. It was at 50. Now I'm going to go over to 75. And just overall, let's see what the exposure is going to look like if I give it a little bit more here, just to brighten it up. And already we can kind of see some difference here. A nice little trick I like to do is just highlight the field you want to change and use the up and down arrows. You can do those minor adjustments. In this point, it's case for exposure, it's 0.05 increments. But already, I mean, just my goodness, we've almost done nothing. One preset, we fixed up the highlights a little bit, we fixed up the shadows a little bit, and then I pulled up the exposure just a tad, and we have this very obvious difference from the raw file to where we are now. As you can see here, that really dark, deep, almost too much depth, and there's not enough information showing up in the faces. That bright light from behind is just a little bit too much overkill there, and it's really not helping the matter. It's not helping the image, but just those few little adjustments in Camera Raw here, and now we have a vibrant, beautiful, rich image. And yes, pushing up the exposure brought some of those highlights back, but that recovery or those highlight slider there, bringing it down, did keep some of that intact. But in reality, should shadows be totally visible? Could you let a shadow go all the way to dark black, you know? Absolutely. Can you let a highlight blow out and go white? For sure. There's no real rules of how you do this. It's just how do you want it to look in the end. Okay, so I'm going to fine tune just a little bit further because I think we can push it up just a tad more in the way of brightening it up overall. I just feel like it's kind of dim, and you know what, I'm just going for the full stop on that, and we'll just give it one stop of light. Okay, and with this I feel like the shadows are nice and rich and everything, but let me just pull down the blacks a little bit, kind of increase that contrast, give a little bit more depth to the dark areas of the photo. And here we go, we have a little bit more going on there. Now I do have clarity up a little there. You know, some people really don't like clarity, they think it's degrading the image and whatnot. I'm okay with a slight bump because it's how does the image look? I mean, that's what pictures are. How does it look when it's done, right? So that's what I'm considering when I'm doing this. So to each their own, you know, do what you want to do. But a preset, a few little adjustments. I've messed with 4 sliders, you know, and we've come a long way. Do we want to fix up the white balance? Well, if we have an easy way of doing so, for sure. But what I like to do is just start with some of those preset white balance options there. Let's see what the daylight balance, because it was during the day. Let's see how far it pushes it. I think it's just going to get a little bit more yellow. You know, that's cool. Yeah, we got a little bit of a warm tone in there. I don't think it's, you know, a distraction that it's that yellow, but also something we can kind of clean up a little bit later if we so choose. I kind of like the warmth. It helps the mood of the image, in my opinion. And what we'll do here is we're going to bring that into Photoshop. Just open the image. So here we are in Photoshop now. And with this image here, I don't think we need to go too far, you know? So let's take a look at what we really want out of it. I feel like there's little differences that we can do here to enhance the photo. It's a nice wide angle shot. You get a little bit more in focus, but we still have that shallow depth of field and that framing because we're shooting through the trees. But you can see there's a lot of clarity moving beyond the individuals in the frame here. And just when we start to look at their foreground, it's pretty darn sharp, you know, coming closer to the camera and pushing further back. But we have such depth between the foreground elements right next to the camera, right next to the lens and our subject, that these do fall out of focus very easily. And that's one thing about wide angle lenses, you get a little bit more in focus. It's harder to get that shallow depth of field, so you can increase your appearance of shallow depth of field by doing things such as getting close to foreground elements and therefore having that difference between really out of focus pieces to the frame and then the in focus subject matter. But that's just more of a little trick that you can use when you're framing up for interesting portraits like this, or, you know, in landscapes, to give it some of a dramatic difference. When we're looking at this, I think just a little bit more on them would be nice, if we can kind of almost spotlight them. So there's a few ways to do it. Here we go. I'm going to pull up our different adjustment layers, and for right now I like to go with curves. It's one of the most basic adjustment layers you can add to an image. In this way of using curves, it's a non-destructive approach. You could go through the menus up here, doing image adjustments, and then do the adjustment directly to the image there. But if we do it as an adjustment layer, now we have a separate layer to the image that we can manipulate further. Okay, so we're going to pull this up. Oh my goodness, we're going to fly way up there. A little way too bright. It's very rich, looks very nice. It's kind of that bright and airy look, but I think it's a little bit too much, more than we need to do. But we can hold on to some of that. I pull it up in the middle so we can just see what brightening it up will do. Okay, I'm going to lock in a couple more points on the curves layer as to not skew it too much further. And then I'm going to grab this last one down here and we're going to slide it over just a tad, just a little bit. What we're doing is we're clipping the blacks right there. We're making the darkest of darks just fall off and more quickly grab more and just push them straight to black. Alright, now we can do the same thing up here, just grab a little bit more of the highlights and bring them up as to give some difference in contrast. Okay, so here's what I want you to see. Just going to close that for a second, just so we can get more of the image. Just turning off the curves layer, what we have here is a very dramatic difference. We thought we made a big step in the right direction coming through the raw, the Adobe Camera Raw there, from the raw file to this, and now just a curves layer to really boost things. Now, yeah, we're losing detail because we've brightened it up so much. That grass is starting to blow out. We're getting rid of those wood chips again. Is it a big deal though? Maybe, maybe not, and to each their own. Because again, it's an image, you the photographer, you the artist, and your style and your customers, all of that comes together to what is it you want out of this picture. Now me, I personally like this bright and airy look for this image because we have this big open secret of a space, right? It's a big open area under a tree. It seems like a nice little secret where they can have this moment, and I think just giving it a little bit more life, a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more bright and airy feel, even though it's in this enclosed space, is a good contrast of the feel of the image and the visual representation. So maybe that's a little bit further than a lot of you care to even, worry about when it comes to this kind of stuff. But, I try to think about those things. It's meaningful when you're creating the final outcome of your images, what it is that you're looking for, how you're going to go about creating the final look. So let me grab a brush here. I'm just going to pull up the size a little bit. Yeah, let's go there quick now. Excellent. And I like a nice soft brush. Now, the reason I have a brush is because I'm going to do some painting. Now, I'm not a painter, I'm a photographer, but we do have our adjustment layer, and on the curves layer here, we have what's called a layer mask. This particular thing is to determine what is showing and what is not showing on that layer, okay? And you can add a mask to just about any layer out there. So let me just create a copy here, and we can add a mask to that layer very easily. Now there's a mask. What does a mask do though? A mask will determine what is showing and what's not showing, and we do that through very specific difference of white or black. That's it, and when it comes to masks, it's very black and white. Okay, so we can add a mask. That's great, awesome, wonderful to know about, and how easy that can be. On our curves layer, again, it's nice and bright. I'm going to select the mask, make sure we have it on there, and if I have my brush selected with the white, in theory, I'm just painting white on the mask. The mask is already white, so that won't do anything. But if I can switch over to black, just real quick, turn of the key there, switch to black, and now I'm going to paint on the mask here. We're at 100% opacity, 100% flow, and I'm just going to get rid of, what this is doing is erasing the effects. It's erasing the effects of that curves layer where I painted in. So when I'm erasing that, I'm saying I don't want to see the effects of this layer in these areas in which I have painted black. You can do gray as to give it a slight opacity, meaning some of it does show, some of it doesn't. It's showing a lesser amount, that kind of thing. But anything between, pure white and pure black, and all the grays in between, that will affect your curves layer. So when you're on a curves layer, you're going to be painting in white or you're going to be painting in black. White will show what is happening from that layer. When you're on that mask, white will be showing what is happening on that layer, and black will be hiding what's on that layer. So there we go. You can see on the curves layer where I painted in black. This is not at all accurate or anything I want right now, but I painted in black there, and we can tell in the image right here, it goes into this very, darker areas, darker corner there, it's darkening over here, and we still have that light, bright area in the center and all that. If you wanted to see the mask in particular of what you did, you can hold Alt or Option, click on the mask itself, and then it'll flip over to your black and white and where you've painted. So obviously it's a terrible paint job here, right? No big deal, doesn't matter, because I don't even like it. I don't even want to use any sort of masking when it comes to this particular image. So let's get out of there here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to toss the mask. I'm going to say, forget it, I don't want it, don't need it. Alright, so we have the curves layer. I don't need the mask. I'm going to leave one on there for habit, I guess, in case I change my mind. But really just that little bit, that curves layer, pulling it through raw, few adjustments right after a preset. We've come a long way with this image, and we didn't even have to work that hard to get there. Now, what I want to point out is when we go to the original image, alright, the original image, to this, look at that. Oh, it's beautiful. The original image to this now change, and it didn't take us much, but there's a few things to notice. That original picture, let's go back. That original picture is really dark. Did I do something wrong? Did I shoot it incorrectly? Well, yes and no. it is underexposed, but it is on purpose, because I wanted to maintain as much highlight detail as possible. If I didn't, and I shot so the people were exposed correctly, we would have lost all of that grass behind them. All of that sky would be gone. Alright? Every little bit of it would not even be possible. Now, I understand in the edit, I ended up, pushing it, and we're losing some of the sky and we're losing some of the grass, but it's not completely gone in every area. So, knowing how you use your equipment to get the image that you truly want, that can make a huge difference. Shooting correctly in camera is one thing. Shooting correctly in camera, knowing the limitations of the image and what you plan on doing with it, that's another. And it doesn't come quickly, but it does come over time with practice. So my 2 cents, learn your gear. Be the photographer you want to be. Take and Talk Pics, I'm Rob Kruger. Please subscribe.